What's going on everyone, Havoc here. I recently got bit by the PC building bug and I had been watching a ton of YouTube videos on it, so I decided to build my own. I was pretty nervous since it's my first time actually building a PC, but I had a lot of fun along the way. My goal was to keep the price under $1,500 because I didn't want to spend a crazy amount of money on it, and I think I accomplished that goal. The next goal was to build a PC that will play all games maxed at 2K Ultra settings with ray tracing. You can check out my other videos which shows benchmarks for some games. Initially, I decided to go with an AMD graphics card, but I actually ended up changing it out later to a Gigabyte RTX 4070S, which was on sale. I'll get into the reason why I changed it at a later time in the video. I'll also include a list of all the parts that I put in the build so you can take a look for yourself. Now, the pricing will depend on if the items are on sale whenever you're planning on building a PC. Luckily for me, I had a Micro Center nearby, and I was able to bundle things together to get a pretty sweet deal on the PC parts. Now, just an FYI, this is not a tutorial, so I don't show everything. You can hop around and see whatever you're interested in. Okay, let's get started. First is the CPU, which is the AMD Ryzen 7700X. Now, if you're wondering why I didn't go with an Intel CPU, well, that's because this was included in the bundle along with the RAM and the motherboard from Micro Center, and I like the combo best. Next, we have the Crucial solid state drive. This is 2 TB of storage, which for me is plenty, and I actually was able to snag this bad boy for $80 on sale at Amazon. And then we have the g.skill memory sticks. It's not RGB, but I don't really care for that because the case that I got has a lot of RGB fans already on it, and plus I didn't want to have too much RGB in my case. Anyway, these are DDR5 and compatible with my motherboard and the Ryzen CPU. Okay, moving on to the hard disk drive. I got this off of Amazon for around $50. It's the 3.5-inch SATA hard disk drive, but I do believe that it's gone up in pricing to around $60. So you can really get whatever hard disk drive you want. My main purpose was that if I want to put videos, pictures, emulation, or anything like that, I can store it onto the hard disk drive. Whereas the solid state drive is solely for gaming and my operating system. For the cooler, I went with an air cooler from Thermalright, and I got the Phantom Spirit 120 Evo. I got this from Amazon and it was shipped like someone had beaten the crap out of the box, but the internal components were all fine, so I decided to keep it. The reason I got this is because it gave off a stealth look like a B2 bomber, which is what I was going for in my overall build, and it has a little bit of RGB so it wasn't too in your face. I watched a video which compared all different air coolers from various brands, and this one fit my budget in terms of what it offered. It had one of the best ratings in terms of cooling versus price ratio. Now obviously there are other ones like Noctua, Be Quiet, and Deepcool, but they're expensive, and like I said, I wanted to keep my build below $1,500, which is also a reason why I didn't go with liquid cooler since they're more expensive. So inside the box, you have your various brackets which are used for different motherboards and stuff, and then you actually have the heat dissipator along with 2 fans which go on either side, and they're connected together by using small metal clips, which you'll see later on in the video. For the power supply unit, I went with the Corsair RM750E. Again, after doing some research, I thought this to be the best for my purposes. This is 750 watts, and I also wanted something fully modular, and in case if I wanted to upgrade the graphics card later, I would still have enough power to supply it. Obviously, it's not enough for like a 4090, but then again, I don't ever plan on buying that overpriced GPU anyway. So for the PSU, I didn't really go for the cheapest one since I didn't want to fry my components. But here's a look at what cables are included and how the layout of the power supply unit is. And you can see it also comes with some zip ties, which I actually didn't really need since I had a lot of my own anyway. Plus the case that I got also has tie downs for cable management, so that was great too. Okay, moving on to the motherboard, I got the MSI Pro B650P Wi-Fi. I got a motherboard with Wi-Fi because some of the motherboards don't actually have Wi-Fi, you have to get it separately, and I didn't want to have to deal with that hassle. Plus, this was bundled with the CPU and RAM, and it seemed like the best deal for me. I wanted to make sure my motherboard had 2 slots for the M2 drives in case I ever needed to add one later, which I don't think I will since I already have 4TB of storage and that seems like a lot. I wanted to also have a front USB Type-C connection since the case that I bought has one on the front, and lastly, I also wanted to make sure that it had plenty of USB ports on the back for all the peripheral connections. And the motherboard comes with the pretty standard stuff, your I/O shield, cables, M2 lockers, and Wi-Fi antennas. Here's a look at all the connectivity options. And before buying this, I did read that some people were having issues with it, like it was taking a few minutes to boot up. Luckily, after using this for a couple months, I haven't run into any of those issues. But I think that the main thing is to make sure that you update the BIOS, because if you don't update the BIOS, then I think that's what most people were running into, that they were running on an older BIOS version, and that's why it was taking them time for the motherboard to boot up. Next up is the graphics card. Now, I was really excited to try out an AMD graphics card and I read a lot of good things about it, but unfortunately I did have to change it out. The reason I changed it was because the 7800 XT had a lot of coil whine when put under heavy load, and I didn't like the constant buzzing sound as I often don't wear a headset when I'm playing games. I tried to get used to it, but in the end I just couldn't, so I decided to change it out. So it actually didn't give me any issues while I was gaming, so I can't say that it's a weak or bad graphics card, it was just the sound that was annoying. And I did read that a lot of people had issues with the coil whine, which is a shame because it's a great card for the price. Anyway, this graphics card was pretty beefy, and it came with a bunch of extra goodies from Asus, one of them being like little magnetic screwdriver, which also served as a support for your graphics card, but changing it out to the Gigabyte RTX 4070S turned out to be better because DLSS is a game changer, and aesthetically it just looked better in my case. Okay, with the components out of the way, I decided to put everything that I could on the motherboard before placing it in the case. Starting off with the CPU, making sure that the arrow on the CPU matched up with the arrow on the motherboard. Now, initially when I clicked it in, the plastic shield only popped off on one side, so I was like, what the heck is going on? Because this was literally the first thing that I did, and I'm like, great, I already messed it up. Then I tried again, and I was able to just pull the plastic piece off. And I was hoping for a satisfying click and pop, but yeah, it just didn't happen. So yeah, here we go, second attempt. And as you can see, when I put it back in, I just pull the plastic piece and it comes off. I then installed the solid state drive, which was extremely simple. You just have to remove the 2 screws off of the heatsink and then plug the solid state drive in, put in the M2 locker, which was included with the motherboard that I showed earlier, and then take the sticker off the heatsink and put it back in place, screw it back in, and you're all done. So one of the easiest parts of the build apart from installing the RAM. Next up is the RAM installation, which, like I said, is probably the easiest thing you can do. You just need to know which slots it goes in on your motherboard and then just click it in place, and that's it. Simple. Okay, here we are installing the air cooler. Now I selected the bracket that worked with my motherboard specifically and then proceeded with the installation. So you have to put some thermal paste onto the CPU before you install the air cooler on top, otherwise for obvious reasons you're going to have heating issues. And I actually ended up putting more than what I showed here because I was like, maybe I just didn't put enough, and then the anxiety started to kick in. Now this wasn't tricky at all until I got to actually placing the air cooler on the brackets. It's hard to see in the video, but you have two screws on either side that you have to push down on while simultaneously screwing in, because there's a little spring mechanism under the screw. So anyway, once that was done, here's what it looked like without the fans in place. Here's my PC case, which is the Montek King 95 Pro, and just as a side note, it's a lot harder to pull the plastic film off with one hand than I realized. But anyway, I got this because it looked pretty cool with the fishbowl appearance, plus it already had 6 fans pre-installed, and the big thing was that it also had a USB-C connection on the front, and plenty of extra space inside the case if I wanted to put in more fans or a liquid cooler in the future, or just basically for a bigger GPU or whatever the case may be. But it also includes reverse fans on the side, which bring in air into the case rather than your traditional fans which push air out. So that's the reason why I decided to get this case, because I didn't want to have to buy more fans. Just as a bonus, the fans have RGB, which is great. If I want it, it's there. If I don't want it, I can always turn it off. On the back here, you can see slots for your PSU and your storage, which are actually reversible, so you can actually put the power supply unit on top and then move the storage for your hard disk drive or solid state drive on the bottom. And then on the front here is all the inputs for your mic, your headphones, your USB-A's, USB-C's. Anyway, moving on. So I put the motherboard inside the case and then put all the screws in their appropriate place. I think there was like, I don't know, 8 or 10 screws. After that was done, I installed the power supply unit, and then I put in the hard disk drive in the tray and connected it. You also have another tray in there in case you want to put another hard disk drive or solid state drive in, so you have plenty of room in the case for adding extras. And then I installed the graphics card, and you can see it's pretty chunky and it does sag a bit on the right side because of the weight, which is what that little support is for that I showed earlier. The little Phillips screwdriver, the magnetic piece. Anyway, after that was just, all the boring stuff like installing all the wires in the right place on the motherboard, and then booting up the BIOS, and then installing the operating system, and blah blah blah. So here's the final look of the finished product. Overall, I think it took like maybe 5 to 6 hours since I had to read where everything goes on the motherboard, and I was going pretty slow so I didn't mess up. But I did have a lot of fun with this, and I feel like I had more confidence in building PCs going forward. I didn't buy any specific PC building tools because I just used whatever household tools I already owned. Basically, I only really needed a Phillips screwdriver, and the next time though, I think I'm going to go for a more compact build. I do like the look of this PC, but it does take up a lot of real estate on my desk. So if you're interested, I'll put a link to the parts below, but here's my total breakdown. For the CPU, GPU, RAM, and motherboard, I got them all from Micro Center for a total of like $1,050 after taxes. For the power supply unit, I got that for $85 from Best Buy. From Amazon, I bought the Logitech case, the air cooler, solid state, and hard disk drive, which was around $300 with taxes. And then I got a really cheap Windows home key for $35 from online website. So my total came out to be like $1470 with taxes. So overall, kept the cost within my budget. But yeah, thanks for watching. Till next time, have a go.